My name is Jim Rodriguez. I am the Senior Director of Clinical Initiatives at the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research and the Community Technical Assistance Center. And I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Understanding ACEs Across Generations. Before we get started, I want to make a few comments and orient you to this webinar. As we always say, just a reminder, you're going to be muted as you come in, and that's to make sure that we don't have background noise. If you come across any technical issues during today's event, please chat to the host who will be able to assist you. You'll have the opportunity to submit questions during the course of the webinar, so please feel free to do that as Cendie Stanford presents using the chat feature, and then we'll keep track of those and bring those back to the Q&A period. We would also appreciate that at the end of today's webinar, you complete our survey and give us feedback, but also let us know of other topics that you'd like us to address, either in this space around ACEs or any other spaces related to behavioral health in children in New York State. And just a reminder, this recording and the slides will be available for you within the next 2 or 3 days, so you don't have to copy down or write notes while you're doing this, while you're participating in this presentation. You'll find them on our website within 2 or 3 days. And we're very excited to have today's presenter, Cendie Stanford. Cendie Stanford is the founder and board president of ACEs Matter Corp, and she is going to be talking today about ACEs across generations. She has been creative in putting together and thinking through her own ACEs genealogy, and she's going to share her experiences. Just for full transparency, Cendie and I have discussed this. Cendie is not a clinician, but she is an advocate for ACEs awareness, and she's going to share her experiences coming through and thinking about ACEs in her family, in the hope that her experience will help you all as clinicians and providers to think about understanding ACEs in the children, families, youth that you work with. So we hope that you'll get a lot out of this presentation and learn from Cendie's experiences. And with all that said, I'd like to turn it over to Cendie Stanford.
Jim, I was sitting here the whole time wondering, am I on camera? Was I on camera the whole time? Hi, everybody. I was up here trying to get it together, like, whew, not going to pay attention to how many people in the room. I'm just so excited to be here. It has been an interesting journey. And I want to say, Jim, before I jump into the presentation, it was because of some of my creativity that you and I actually connected. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
So I'll just real quick, I want to just acknowledge you even more for having me back on the platform, because when I started this idea of wanting to educate the general population about ACEs, I had no idea how far stretched it was going to go, or even how far stretched I was going to be, but it has been great. So I just want to say thank you for that before I get ready to share my words.
You're welcome, and we really appreciate our collaboration with you.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like we have a nice size audience today. So I want to hope like we don't have a whole bunch of technology issues. We did do a run through, and then there's always something, but I'm going to speak it into existence that everything is going to go well. So the first action I have right now is to try to share my screen. So we practice this and it should work just fine. Here we go. Screen number 2 is being shared. Okay. Jim, somebody just give me a quick thumbs
All
up.
good, Cendie. Yep, your slides are up.
Okay, great. So as Jim said, I started a nonprofit in 2020. So that was my COVID year. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me, but I don't think you came here to hear just about me and my whole journey, but there's pieces in my journey that I'm really excited to share with you all. But before I go into introducing myself, we have a quick activity. I'd like to know who's in the room because it's going to help inform which pieces of my journey that I show, even though I've got a scripted PowerPoint, but I definitely want to make sure that those of you that are here today are obviously here to hear a little bit about like what I've come to learn as a result of the last 3 years of just understanding ACEs from a lived experience perspective. But before I go on, I'd like to ask everybody to take a poll. So Kira's going to drop a link in the chat. And if everybody can go to that link, respond to that question. That'll be our icebreaker for today. So a couple of things happening right now. Kira, if you will you drop the link in there for the poll? And for my fast worker, for my people who type really fast, there's also a poll question waiting on you when you come back after that hyperlink. There we go. Okay, so the poll's in there. We got a couple things. If you'll do the poll, and then when you come back to the Zoom, there are a couple questions about your level of experience with the ACE study. Thank you, Kira. I should have said Wordle. I should have said Wordle. You're doing a Wordle. Yeah, sorry. So for those that are back from doing the question on the web link, there was a Wordle. We're going to show the results of that in about 8 slides. So if you didn't get a chance to do that, make sure to click that because I want to capture as many responses as I can when we come back to it. But for right now, I wanted to know before I got into the presentation, how familiar people are in the audience with the whole idea of the ACE study. And according to the responses, we have a mixture, so this is perfect. It looks like everybody is in the right place. Kira, can we do question number 2 on the poll? Question number 2 on the poll. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being expert level, how familiar are you with the findings of the PCE study, Positive Childhood Experience Study, on a scale of 1 to 5? And then Kira, if I can I see the results of Q1 one more time? Oh, Q1. Okay, there we go. It looks like we have about over half the class that has at least intermediate to expert level knowledge. So that is really good to know. And then Kira, go ahead and give us the results for poll number 2, because the PCE study is the opposite of ACE study, which I will talk a little bit about in a couple of the slides to come. So can we have the results for Q2? Amazing. So it looks like I could spend a little bit more time on the PCE study because more than half the class are unfamiliar with it. And we have a couple of people, looks like we have about 20 people that have at least heard of it or may have some expert level experience. All right, so thank you, Kira, for that. I appreciate that. Back to the presentation. Here we go. So to make sure you're in the right room, according to the registration, I am going to share with you all part 2 of my first conversation with CTAC, where I talked about me using art to describe what I was understanding about ACEs along my journey. So I'm back for part 2. And if you signed up for this, it's because you are hoping to walk away with some insights on how I've used my process personally and professionally since coming to know about ACEs in 2020. So if that is the reason why you're here, I'm going to do my best to use my story so that hopefully in your practice, if you're somebody who works directly with people with adversities, or if you may be a caregiver working with children or families with ACEs. So welcome to the party. I like to call these parties because I technically believe that I'm parting the knowledge that your counterparts and your predecessors have put out for the public, and I've been able to get access to it. And so because of the work that you all have done in the industry of psychology and neuroscience and epigenetics, I literally dove in. And so this shout outs for you, basically. The shout outs for you because y'all have paved the way for people like me to get an understanding of what is going on with my body and the world in ways that I could not have done had people like you all in this field put forth for us. So here we go. I like to do interactive conversations, so I'm hoping I can see a couple of responses in the chat. Before I tell you a little bit about myself, I find it important to let you know like how I even got to this place of ACEs Matter. And so my question for you is, if you're here to learn about ACEs, whether it's for the first time or you're just getting refresher knowledge, I had this epiphany and I wanted to know, how do you all as an audience learning about ACEs for the first time or just enhancing what you already know about ACEs, how do you want people to respond when they hear about ACEs? And I would love to see some people in the chat just respond to that. How do we want humanity to respond with the information that we've been privileged to learn about? I see compassion and acceptance. I see empathy, compassion. Validation, awareness, openness, understanding.
I'm just going to throw some into Cendie, cultural and systemic change as well. I'm saying that awareness.
They're going fast. So
they're coming in fast.
They're coming in fast. So let's get our brain to switch gears a little bit, because in order for us to be prepared, once I get ready to show that, we're going to open up a can of worms. Like how can you use my experiences as, I'm going to call myself a layperson throughout the training, to better serve, whether it's yourself professionally or personally. So answering this question, if I had to ask myself this question in 2020, some of the programs that I've tried to like create on my own, honestly, are a result of not just my trauma, but my passion for wanting to help people. So loving these responses, curiosity. I want to switch gears. Ask your brain to respond to the question of how do we want humanity to respond to taking action? So once they learn about ACEs, tell me what y'all want in terms of the action you want them, that you want to be able to see, that your eyes want to be able to see. What action do we want people to take after they've learned about ACEs? Okay, some trainings in school, systemic changes, parent education, trainings, and there. Oh, yeah, y'all see, y'all are basically putting together the rest of the presentation for me, so this is super helpful. Support groups, advocacy, creating laws, highlight that one. Yes, I'm seeing parent education come up. Now, I'm going to ask your brain to switch gears one last time. How do we want humanity to prevent ACEs? It's kind of going along with the second question, but if you have a different way of thinking about that, how do we want humanity to respond to preventing ACEs? Parents and education is going to show up again. Addressing the system that creates the ACEs. Early intervention. Hope y'all don't hear the dishes in the background. There's somebody in there. All right, we're gonna go on. I appreciate that. I really appreciate that you guys are giving us some life into this presentation. So now let me share with you how I got here and why I am back for a second or third time. I think this is the third time I've been on a platform where Jim was in the audience, or Jim was in the studio. So I am back. And today I'm hoping that you can leave with three things. That's my hope, but honestly, I think depending on where you are with your level of understanding of ACEs, you can choose to take away anything that you want. Please screenshot any images that you want to know more about or that you are curious about. I want to make sure that I give these resources away to people, because if what I can do with the language that I have to explain ACEs helps you, please take as much as you need, but in front of you. And the three things that I'm hoping you walk away with today. One is I want to give you an idea of what my journey as a lived experience survivor has been like. Also, as somebody who was a six-figure earner in education, and at any point in time as a school principal, I was in charge of anywhere from 300 to 800 traumatized kids. So altogether, I've got over 4 decades of personal trauma. And it was in 2020 where I was able to put a name to it. And that was when I learned about the ACEs study. So fast forward from 2020 to today, what you see in front of you are my version of my FICO scores. If y'all are familiar with the FICO credit score, it basically tells the credit bureaus what your credit worthiness is. And so in this presentation, one of the things that I'm going to share with you is that when we get ready to open up this conversation about ACEs, people are super familiar with numbers, and a part of what's worked for me is being able to see my life in numbers. Because now I can set personal and professional goals around these numbers. So just like our credit score and any other bodily system that comes with numbers that is important to us, I thought that when I understood what positive childhood experiences were, what emotional intelligence was, what average childhood experiences was, and what childhood resilience score was, I was like, I can at least start there. So I'm hoping that in today's presentation, if you do decide to open this up at a community, familial, or state level, hopefully some of the questions that you all dropped in the chat box in terms of what we want will be answered, in terms of this could be a possible way to bring this conversation both to individuals and communities. So I'm going to explain, or I'm going to share with you what I mean when I say here are my PAIR scores, PEAR. Here are my PAIR scores. So as a person with 14 out of the 15 adverse childhood experiences, I needed to know where the reward of being a first generation college graduate was. Because even with having a 6-figure job, becoming a teacher, being a first generation graduate student, it felt like the struggle was following me. And I remember, like, I checked all the boxes off. I left home, I went to school, I did all that. And of course, there were so many other things that the zip code that I grew up in didn't teach me. And I think it's important for people in the industry of social work or people services take an interest in people's childhood stories, because basically what ACEs has told me is that it has influenced all of those numbers that you see in front of you. And so today I'll spend a little time talking about mostly about the positive childhood experience and the adverse childhood experiences, but there are also other measurements that will help people, for example, who may not have the emotional intelligence to be able to get along with people at work. You know them, you see them, you work with them, you probably treat them, and they may not even realize that might have come from their adverse childhood experiences. So 14 out of 15 ACEs, and it was my PACEs that research is telling me is the reason that I got here. So I'm switching screens on mine, but not on y'all's. Let's try it. So 3 things. When I started the conversation on ACEs, and I realized the depths of the adverse childhood experiences in my family tree, I had opened up a can of worms. But when I looked at that can of worms, I realized that I had to face some wounds, and within those wounds were opportunities. And with those opportunities, I could come up with a myriad of reasons why I would or would not address certain things that were just a part of my history because of the family that I was born into. And I also realized when I opened up that can of worms that there were going to be a lot of memories, some that I could recall very easily, and some that were so buried, so deep in my subconscious, I had no idea that that was contributing to the way I relationshiped as a wife and a girlfriend. And then the last thing is the success. So that's something I think you can take away from this, as well as a layperson like myself running across this big word called epigenetics. And how can we use the science to speak for us when we're trying to get people to come to the conversation on ACEs? And then the last thing is, how do we use other people's stories? And I put OPP on my paperwork for those of us that are that are seasoned enough to know the OPP song. How do we use other people's property or other people's stories to bring families into the conversation? So I think those three things can come out of the next few presentations, but making sure y'all are in the right place. If that sounds right, I'm gonna keep going. I throw these things called awareness parties with ACEs Matter, and I started it in November of 2022. And I used the time with ACEs Matter to show this movie screening called Resilience, the Biology of Stress and the Science of Hope. And I was like, if I want 1 million people to learn about ACEs by 2030, I've got to figure out a way to get out there. And I had to remember, like, I'm coming to this conversation as a lived experience survivor. I didn't have any street cred. How was I going to get this message out? And, you know, even though I've got the degrees in education, but I don't have medical street cred. So Resilience, the Biology of Stress, provided me, quote unquote, a temporary hall pass of medical street cred to get people in a Zoom room, call it a party, and say, you're here to learn about ACEs or to increase your knowledge of ACEs. So I started doing that. And I say that because in the film screening, I give people 2 disclaimers. One, like, hey, I'm not a doctor, and this is for educational purposes only. Blase, blase, blase. We see it all the time, right? But the second disclaimer that I give people that I want you all to walk away with, hopefully you can bookmark this, especially if you're new to the conversation on ACEs, or if you're just here to enhance your knowledge. One of my biggest aha moments when I learned about ACEs was that when I really could understand them, I could not unsee them. When I would see school shootings, or even television shows sometimes, or even the news, if I decided to watch the news, I could not unsee ACEs. I share that with you because when you come to the privilege of learning about ACEs for the first time, or even enhancing what you already knew about ACEs, we are at a crossroads because we're a part of a small population of people that are learning about this. How are we going to treat the people who have not heard about it? And there's a lot of it. When we see ACEs happening, whether it's through tragedies or through environmental factors where people were already in the struggle, how do we respond, like someone chatted in the chat earlier, with compassion? Because we know why they may still be in the struggle when they could have been out a long time ago if they would have just XYZ, took the advice that I told them. So I share with people who come to learn about ACEs for the first time that, this is for educational purposes only, and we know that education leads us to change if we have the resources to make those changes. But 2, when we come to know information that technically makes us smarter than other people, which is not like the right way, this politically correct way to say that, but it's a privilege to know about ACEs. So how will you treat people, both in your practice, those who need services from you? How will we treat those people? And then the other disclaimer, and this is primarily for people who are learning about ACEs for the first time. ACEs can be pretty graphic. So this is like that social media post where they warn you, like, hey, if you swipe right, you're probably gonna see something graphic. Like this is kind of serving that purpose, because I found that when I have opened this can of worms in the population of general people who just like been saying they want to get their stuff together and they were willing to hear the conversation on ACEs, some of them had a really hard time with it. As a matter of fact, there is a lady who I won't name, but she was turning 80 the year that she learned about ACEs. And for 80 years, y'all, she had been holding on to that. That's a long time. That's a long time to finally say this happened to me in childhood. So we always warn people that if we go into this, at least this is what has been helpful, having access to my colleagues who are in the field, that the first thing that we have to teach people when we are wanting to educate them about ACEs is to teach them how to feel their emotions, because many of us, especially those who grew up in environments like mine, we weren't taught about emotions. We were taught to bottle up our emotions, and what the epigenetics is telling us is that bottled emotions cause sickness, and that's a fact. And so when we start this conversation as clinicians or service providers, obviously asking people, to seek the care of, professional advice, if we don't have the medical expertise, but teaching people how to feel those experiences. And then the other thing that has come up as a result of me doing the work of ACEs is that there's no one right formula. I have learned about CBT, tapping, emotional freedom technique, brain spotting. There's one therapy that I even did where the lady just had me stand there and she just watched, she asked me questions and she would watch the direction of I tried everything. So here, of course, this came from Google. Obviously there's, it's facetious, but it's not. But Google puts this up anytime you get ready to watch a YouTube video that may contain information where somebody's sharing a very graphic story. There's a couple of YouTube channels that I won't promote here, but those YouTube channels are dedicated to the stories of childhood abuse survivors. And this is one of the first things that you have to agree to before you watch it. So just know that that is what it's like when you open up the conversation on ACEs, which brings me to how the conversation on ACEs got started. People who have expert knowledge in ACEs, this story is probably familiar with you. Give me a second because my mouth is super parched. Background knowledge, because we have some people in the room that are learning about this for the first time. In the movie Resilience, the awareness party that I mentioned that ACEs Matters throws, the two of the doctors that came together, one of the conversations in there talks about a conversation actually got us here to even be at a place where we have so much data on adverse childhood experiences. But during an obesity trial program where they were helping women lose weight, totally unrelated to childhood adversity, it was during the course of an interview that one of the doctors was having with a lady who at one point had lost upwards of 200 plus pounds. I mean, she literally lost so much weight, they were surprised and thought they had just hit a gold mine, that the program was working. And then all of a sudden she put the weight right back on. And she disappeared for a long time. And when he came back around to it, and I'm giving y'all an abbreviated version of the story, he wanted to know what happened. Like, you were doing so well, what happened? And it was this conversation that you see on the screen. He asked her, how much did you weigh when you were first sexually active? And then the patient participating in the obesity program answered 40 pounds. Dr. Ferletti thought he had misheard the woman, so he repeated the question, and he said, but this time when the woman replied, she burst into tears and said, it was when I was 4 years old with my father. That is an ACE. That is an adverse childhood trauma experience. And that is very, very common in the United States of ACEs. So when we open up the can of worms, taking into account that some of our people that are hearing this may be hearing it for the very first time and have never shared that story with anybody. That has been one of my other big aha moments as my friends and people that I've worked with have gotten to know the work that I'm trying to do with ACEs Matter, or I strive to do with ACEs Matter. It's like a floodgate of stories. And I'm sure as clinicians and people in the service field, you probably hear them all the time. People are looking for a place to tell their story. And they need permission from service providers and people who are trained to know that you can bring up things from your childhood and move past those, as long as these resources are in place. And if we can help them normalize it, which is the whole idea of the ACE awareness movement, like let's normalize what happened in our childhood. What comes up? It's time for me to pause because my mouth is super dry. Thank y'all for your participation. It is heavy. What is coming up for us? Because there's only like 20 more slides up. I don't even know if I'll get to them all, but what's coming up for us so far? It's heavy. I worry about my patients. Thank you. Oh, somebody put a good one in there, providing resources for both sides. I don't want to assume what you meant, but I'm hoping it's what I'm thinking, in that the victim and the victimized need help. Thank you. So our backs are to the future. Anybody in this crowd ever watched one of the Back to the Future shows back from the 80s? Type of Z like zebra if you've seen this show before, or the movie. Z like zebra. Oh yeah, okay, good. This makes it a lot easier. We got a lot of people who've seen it before. So our backs are to the future. The reason why I put that up there is because the next thing I want you to do in the chat, if you're able, is to type any number that you can think of between 1 and 33. Any number that you can think of between 1 and 33. Drop that in the chat. And I'm just going to randomly pick one. Actually, Kira, can I oh, Kira, I'm going to call an audible real quick. Kira, can I get the results from the Wordle? I'm going to do an audible real quick. If I stop my screen share?
Sure.
Okay, cool. I think you can take over, right? Or if you just, or however you do it, maybe I can drag it, like, or maybe, or just take over like we planned. There you go. Ooh, and I can drag it, right? I can drag it. Ooh, I can drag it. So that's your screen. Can y'all see the Wordle? Is your Wordle showing up right now?
Yeah, we can see it, Cendie.
Yay. Okay, cool. These are the responses for the Wordle question that came up. One word that summarizes what we desire for our children. Happiness, safety, confidence, fulfillment, serenity, nurturing. Considerate happiness must have been a big one. Peace is a big one. Educational, independence, prosperity, emotionally, advocacy, opportunity, connected. Okay, all of these are great. I don't see any reason. Thank you, Kara. That's good. So I need to reshare again, right? Almost got this, right? Reshare again. Here we go. Come back. Here we go. Part 2, down my journey. Lauren Juris, you picked number 31. Lauren Juris, I hope I'm saying your last name right, but Lauren, you dropped the number 31. The number 31 on the screen that you see in front of me, 33 consequences and tragedies associated with adverse childhood experiences, is unemployment poor credit. When we ask what do we want for children, I'm going to guess that nobody wanted a child to grow up and be unemployed with poor credit. Does that sound about right? Somebody else put number 18. I'm gonna guess that when we asked what do we want for children, nobody put that they wanted a child to grow up to be in low income, gambling, and living in a community of ACEs. 24, you put school suspensions. I didn't see that on the chart of what we wanted for children. And the last one, 23, you put 23, school shootings, early death. So when I say our backs are to the future, one of the big things that has come up as my work of a lived experience to survive the term professional worker in this is that there has been millions, hundreds of millions of dollars spent on studying the side effects of adverse childhood experiences. And in this chart, you see 33, and this is where we stopped, of the consequences that if you get into the rabbit hole, if you will, of ACEs, you can essentially find any one of these categories that ACEs can be associated with. Our backs are to the future because if we can predict what the outcomes of ACEs, can we create some of the things that you chatted about earlier to prevent them? So my next question before I move to the next slide is, how could you use this information that you see in this 1 through 33 list to get people interested in the conversation? And this is a question that I, as a lived experience survivor and somebody who's trying to run a nonprofit, like I honestly want to know, because I'm 3 years in and I'm still looking for creative ways to use this information to get people talking. So I'd love to see in the chat if anybody's willing to share. In what ways could we use information like this to get communities and families talking about what we want for children and how this is why we're getting what we're getting for children, if that makes sense? Anybody in the chat interested in sharing? What if we can talk about one thing that affects 33 negative outcomes? Who would you? That's a good one, Teresa. Thank you. Thank you. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Somebody said it's 22 is supposed to be dissatisfaction. Let me go. Relationship satisfaction. It's, yeah, lack thereof. So dissatisfaction. Yes, I feel you're correct. That could be dissatisfaction. Yes. Please feel free to screenshot or capture that if you're interested, or if you sign up with the newsletter at the end, this can also be given to you in a digital copy. I'm going to move on. It is easy to build strong children and repair broken men. That is another part of something that kept coming up in my journey as somebody going down this rabbit hole, trying to figure out, like, how can I help people who have experiences like mine and who may be looking for a way out. So we already did the poll results. You're going to need your sound on the next one. Before I share with you one of the resources that I'm going to give away as a complimentary copy, I want to give you the answer to your poll questions. And this video has a lot of personal meaning to me, but I'd like for you to come up with your own in terms of like what this means for you in your personal and professional work. It definitely hit home for me on my journey. And I think that this video particularly, it's about a little bit over 3 minutes long, but it, in my opinion, epitomizes what our children are trying to tell us, and our children being our greatest teachers. So you'll need your sound on this one. Letter X if you've seen this story or seen this video. Drop a letter X if this one's familiar to you.
Buddy Son Story Time.
The Rabbit Listened by Corey Dorfeld.
Jim, can you all hear? Just checking again.
One day, Taylor decided to build something. Something new. Something special. Something amazing. Taylor was so proud.
Mhm.
But then, out of nowhere, things came crashing down. The chicken was the first to notice. Cluck, cluck. What a shame! I'm so sorry this happened. Let's talk about it. Cluck, cluck. But Taylor didn't feel like talking.
We just
So
need
the
to
chicken
remember
left.
exactly the way things were.
Next came the bear, but Taylor didn't think. The hyena. Let's go knock down someone
I
else's.
bet you feel so angry. Let's shout about it. Roar!
But Taylor didn't feel like doing anything with anybody. So eventually, they all left. But Taylor didn't feel like shouting. Left. So the bear left. The elephant knew just what to do. The elephant knew just what to do.
Fruit pie, I can fix this. We just need to remember exactly the way things were.
But Taylor didn't feel like remembering. So the elephant left. One by one they came. The hyena.
Let's laugh about it.
The ostrich.
Gulp. Let's hide and pretend nothing happened.
The kangaroo. What a mess. Let's throw it all away. And the snake. Shh. Let's go knock down someone else's. But Taylor didn't feel like doing anything with anybody. So eventually, they all left. Until Taylor was alone.
Hmm.
In the quiet, Taylor didn't even notice the rabbit. But it moved closer and closer. Until Taylor could feel its warm body. Together, they sat in silence until Taylor said,
Please stay with me.
The rabbit listened.
Hmm.
The rabbit listened as Taylor talked. The rabbit listened as Taylor shouted. The rabbit listened as Taylor remembered. And laughed. The rabbit listened to Taylor's plans to hide. To throw everything away. To ruin things for someone else. Through it all, the rabbit never left. And when the time was right, the rabbit listened to Taylor's plan to build again.
I can't wait.
Taylor said.
It's going to be amazing.
The end.
Please subscribe.
What came up for you when you think about how you want people to respond once they learn about ACEs? You watched that video, what came up for y'all? I see Lenore said, wow. Tanya gave us some love. Just listen, no judgment or comments. Remember, we asked, what do we want? How do we want humanity to respond when they learn about ACEs? How do we want? I love it, Colleen. We need more people. Sometimes we just, and that is all that, like, if I could stop the presentation right now, I could stop it just by saying that, y'all, 3 years, ACEs Matter will be 3 years old next month. And my biggest learning curve was like, people just wanted us to listen. And I can tell you that as a person with 14 out of 15 adverse childhood experiences, write this down. When you leave a traumatic childhood, listening becomes one of the hardest tasks you have to accomplish. Because that part of our nervous system didn't develop as well as somebody who had an empathetic learning environment. So empathetic listening by the rabbit. Thank you all unconditionally. Thank you, Donna. Thank you. And Brene Brown's video about empathy. Yes, very strong connection, right? And that brings me into, I learned about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, in February of 2020. Because I was standing at a copy machine where somebody had left a blank copy of the quiz at the copy machine. And I was up next to make my copies. That person went on, and apparently that person must have been doing a training that lends itself to ACEs, because that was why the 10-question questionnaire was there. But all that to say is, I learned about ACEs at a copy machine while working for a job that I consider to be a privilege. And I think as service providers and people who are working with traumatized individuals, one of the best things that we could offer, that I'm going to encourage y'all to put in, like, maybe your to-do list or like something to think about list, is catch us on guard, not off guard. I was caught off guard by the questions on the questionnaire at the copy machine at my job at around 4:00 one afternoon in February of 2020. So in the midst of COVID getting ready to take off, lost my job in March of 2020. And it was the rabbit hole of me picking up Nadine Burke Harris's book, picking up some Brene Brown books, and obviously doing what most everybody else was doing in 2020, stuck in the house. I was stuck in the house with this new information about ACEs. Now, the good news is, on the other side of it, I was like, my trauma response was, well, I'll create a business because I got to do something with this information. I can't just sit on it. And so ACEs Matter came as a result of somebody leaving the quiz on the copy machine. And me just happened to see it and take it and realize that's a pretty high score. I wonder what that means. And that's the question I was left with in February of 2020. It would be May of 2020 before the dots started to connect for me. So idea number one is catch people with ACEs on guard, meaning invite them to parties like that you're going to, or workshops or webinars. Like, find ways where they can obviously increase their education on what it means to learn about ACEs. And I think that was a couple of the people's sentiments in the poll question, is like, we got to have parenting education. Parenting education is bringing them to your parties where you are learning this information, or creating spaces where they can go and learn the information from people who can help them make sense of it in a way that's not threatening. So catch us on guard, not off guard, is my second idea. And then I want to leave the last 20 so minutes for us to like talk, and if there's any questions, but I do want to give you one other tool. Earlier, I showed you what my scores were. And on my website, I'll drop it in the chat if you're interested. It is a work in progress, full disclosure, but it's a start. You can take it, you can use what you can to make it your own, however you want, but it was a start. Earlier, I talked about making sure people know their PAIR scores, and that we're not just focused on the adversities in our childhood. I'm able to stand before you because there was some positive things that happened even in the midst of my 14 out of 15 childhood adversities. And I think if we can give people the pathway in this order to first, like, if there were, let's find out if there were any positive childhood experiences in your life. And giving them access to that 7-question survey is one of the things that I would highly recommend. Now, my disclaimer to that is that there have been times where I have done this, and there are people that are in my audience that not only have a high ACE score, they have a low PCE score. This is where the emotional intelligence and the resilience survey come in. Well, even with that person who ended up in one of our trainings, who had a high ACE score and a low positive childhood experience score, they showed up because they were at the resilient point in their life where they wanted to learn something so that they could figure out how to get out of the hole that they were in, right? So identifying instruments that'll help people see what's right about them instead of what's wrong about them. And then I'll put the top on this conversation by saying advice that came from a participant in one of the ACE awareness parties was that she realized that even though she had a lot of her own adverse childhood experiences, she said just knowing her score was an intervention in itself. Because now she had a way to measure, like, okay, now that I'm aware of ACEs, at minimum, I can try to make sure that I can reduce the number of ACEs that my children are exposed to. So giving people a visual of like how they can see us, a visual of how we can see ourselves progressing on these ways. Obviously, if we're out of childhood, then it's going to turn to the conversation on the children who are under age 18 that have access to us. How can we create positive experiences for them? So my advice here, if you're interested, go to the website, take a look at what we've created, take what you need. And if you sign up for the newsletter, I'm actually going to give an option to take away my genealogy tree. I can give you access to some guided worksheets, but again, I encourage you to create something that works for your audience. Oh, my goodness. I was just talking through that. It was on my slide, but not y'all's, but there it is. Sorry. So sorry. Maybe that was helpful. But the Positive Childhood Experience Survey has 7 questions, work out of John Hopkins by Dr. Christina Bedell, since there were many people who said that they hadn't heard of her. And I'm actually going to let you hear a quick 3-minute clip before we get to the goodies. The Emotional Intelligence Survey has 7 questions. And then the one that's on my website, the Adverse Childhood Experience Survey, I used the extended version. The original version had 10 questions, and Philadelphia did an extended one. So I modified some of the questions from there to give people a sense of the different types of adversities that happen outside of the 10. And then, of course, the Resilience Survey is another tool that many organizations use to help people identify resilience factors in themselves and how they can help build that in others.
We're going to spend a moment now on a new study about how positive.
Okay, this is just a quick 4-minute interview with the lady who did the study on positive childhood experiences. I would really like for y'all to leave this conversation having more of an awareness on positive childhood experiences, even though the ACEs stuff is great and it's dandy, but from my own personal experience, if we don't give people something to hope for, then many of the times I was leaving conversations wondering, like, how could I have done that differently? Because I actually have participants say that because ACEs deliver such bad news, like even possibly being at risk of dying 20 years early, like it's a lot of bad news associated with ACEs. So I want to encourage that, especially if you're new to learning about ACEs, start with PACEs first. Because we know that kids are going to be coming to us with ACEs, and adults are going to be kids are going to be leaving childhood with ACEs. So I think the best thing that we could use in terms of our resource of time, this is my pivot in 2023, is to spend more of my time teaching people how to understand positive childhood experiences. So with all that said, these are the 5 positive childhood experiences that I personally had while at the same time collecting 14 out of the 15 ACEs. I had 2 non-parent adults who genuinely cared about me. I was involved in Young Life. I'm not going to read all of these, but these are the 5 things that, according to Dr. Christina Bedell, which you'll hear shortly, said that we could be doing more of these types of things in neighborhoods. So my recommendation for you, based on where you live geographically, is to identify what organizations in your zip code, and if you're not already doing this, having those resources and bringing this information of positive childhood experiences up with families and people who work with children under 18, so they can know, even in the midst of ACEs, we can create positive experiences. So I want to share this quick 4-minute interview from the researcher, Dr. Cendie Stanford, who shares what a part of her story and how she came to the research on positive childhood experiences after learning about ACEs. So quick 4-minute video. And then Jim, I want to make sure y'all can hear one more time just to check.
Relationships people have as children may have long-lasting impacts. The research is done by Christina
Thank you.
Bethel of the Johns Hopkins
Okay,
Bloomberg
yes, y'all
School of
can hear.
Public
Okay,
Health. And for her, this work is personal. She faced a lot of adversity growing up in a low-income housing complex in LA in the 1970s. But there were positive things too.
There's this woman, her name was Mrs. Raccoon, and every Saturday she had a birthday party, and she would have tea and little hard candies, and we would just sit there together and celebrate. And I'm not sure if every week there was even a child with a birthday, but it didn't matter. We just sat there and she was just present, didn't talk a lot, but she was there, and she was always there.
Bethel says there's lots of research that shows that adversity, things like abuse and neglect, can have negative impacts later in life. Her new study, out today in JAMA Pediatrics, looks at the impact that positive experiences in childhood can have on adults, particularly on their mental health.
What is reported on here are experiences as lived and recalled by the person. So even if someone else might look in and say, you didn't have adversity or you had lots of nurturing as a child, it's really what we took in and built our beliefs and identity around that has actually been knocking around in our nervous system, in our brains, and our emotions all this time. For our study, we analyzed data from the Wisconsin Behavioral Risk Factor Survey, and the specific positive childhood experiences that were assessed in the survey asked whether the respondents recalled that they were able to talk with their family about their feelings, felt that their family stood by them during difficult times, had at least 2 non-parent adults who took genuine interest in them, whether they felt safe and protected by an adult in their home, felt supported by friends, and felt a sense of belonging in high school and in their community. First of all, we did find that positive experiences were indeed associated with lower rates of mental health problems and higher rates of having relationships as an adult where you get the social and emotional support you need, because we need this throughout all life. Yet it's the accumulation of positive experiences that really pack the punch. Getting to the numbers, we found that having higher counts of those positive experiences was associated with 72% lower odds of having depression or poor mental health. Overall, we believe that our study really does shine a light of hope, that every moment matters. Every interaction with a child has a reaction in that child. Even as we keep up working to address the many social and cultural factors we need to address to prevent negative experiences, we should be focused on proactive promotion of the positive, intervene early when adverse experiences do take place, and buffer negative effects by restoring in any way we can a child's sense of safety, belonging, the capacity to become and grow. In particular, to promote this in a through any door kind of way, like happened in my childhood, so that wherever a child goes, to school, early care, walking around their community, to a doctor, they're met with warmth, and adults that really purposely try to see and respond to them and meet their healthy needs for care and guidance.
That's Professor Christina Bethel of Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Her study is out today in the journal JAMA Pediatrics.
What are your feels on Dr. Bedel's story? Anybody have any input on hearing about positive childhood experiences from the researcher's perspective. You share that. And while you're thinking about sharing the second part of the pair journey that we're creating at ACEs Matter, the positive childhood experience is obviously the P standing for that one, and then the emotional intelligence, which anybody that's doing the work, even if you dipped your toes into the conversation on emotional intelligence, many researchers are saying obviously people are hiring more for EQ than IQ, and guess what? If you leave a childhood and you have high childhood adversities, your emotional intelligence is one of the things that does not get developed. And guess what? Remember the one on the 1 through 33 list that talked about low income, poor employment or something like that? That's a direct result of it. And so I think by helping people assess right now where they are as adults and then where their children are will definitely create a visual for people to see exactly where they are on this, what we call our own community bell curves. And so for me, when I did my EIQ test, I scored a 25 out of 35, and it immediately gave me stuff that I needed to work on, like parts of my brain that just didn't get developed where in comparison to somebody else that didn't. So going to workshops, finding books, watching podcasts, like literally having to teach my adult self how to behave. And I don't know if you have friends or family members like that, like literally these are things that had to happen in childhood. And if people didn't get them in childhood, they become our spouses, our boyfriends, our girlfriends, our coworkers, right? And so inviting them to the things that we are learning about, and then just accepting that maybe I dropped a seed, but I'm not going to sit here and see if this mustard seed turns into this giant tree. That would be very boring. But the power of
I'm sorry, folks, I just want to check in to see, I think Cendie has frozen. Are others seeing the same thing I'm seeing? Oh, okay. Let's hold on.
I went offline and I just noticed it. So I'm on my cell phone. It's my computer's trying to come back on. Oh no. Okay, hold on. Here we come. Oh no. Okay, I think it's coming back on.
Okay, we can hear you now.
You can. I'm on my cell phone though, so I can't switch the share screen. What do you see on your screen?
Just your ACEs Matter logo.
Okay. Here we go.
Okay, you're back.
I gotta get off that phone now.
Okay, we're back on.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't even realize that my internet. Can you still hear me, James?
Yep.
And you see my screen or no?
Yep, and we see your slides.
Sorry, I don't know. Okay. And it's you see the horse? Is that the one you see?
No, we see self-expression, self-perception, interpersonal skills, stress management, and
looks like I got
Cendie, I'm sharing the slides, but I can stop if you want to take over.
Oh, that was you. Okay. I think let's try it again. Maybe I'll have to turn my camera off to keep the internet from stealing so much data. That did not happen earlier, but here we go. We almost made it through. Okay, so I need to be able to share again, right? Share screen. Okay, I think I got it. Here we go. And you can hear me, right, Kira?
Yes.
Okay, whew, that was a close one. Okay, before we got cut off, I was asking if people could drop the letter Y in the chat box if you are familiar with the term epigenetics. Familiar meaning you know it well enough where you could explain it, the concept to somebody. Lots of whys, okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Long of the short, not a conversation on epigenetics, but if you have never heard about it, I highly encourage picking up the book. The Body Keeps the Score is one that gets into the conversation. It's an easy read. Or there's a guy by the name of Deepak Chopra who writes about supergenes. This particular statement that you see on the screen with the horse, he basically broke it down and said epigenetics suggests that our cells can, in a sense, remember everything we have experienced. That is how powerful the science of teaching ACEs to our population is. That's what it did for me. And so my second thing that I'm hoping you could take away from this is that when we do open up the can of worms, we let the science do the talking for us. But when I say let the science do the talking for us, let the science do the talking for us in the sense that it's not going to be above the heads of the people that we're trying to reach. Going down the rabbit hole to try to understand how can you explain epigenetics to people who are just learning about ACEs. I probably wouldn't go that deep into that, but what I would do, I'm going to share my goodies with you next, is take a moment and look at epigenetics in action in this family's tree. This is what you came here for. I'm hoping y'all can see this because I'm Kara, y'all see the
Yep.
Okay, perfect. This is a part during the webinar where I'm actually interested in getting some responses because the last part of the presentation is going to be getting feedback from y'all or taking some Q&A if we have any, but this is where I share a resource with you, but then I also solicit some professional feedback from the group in that as you look at this family's tree, consider each of those ACE scores on the 10 questionnaire ACE study. This is a family's tree. And what epigenetics says is that if our cells are remembering every piece of data from our entire family history, what does that mean for people who were born into traumatized families? So my question for you here is, what does this particular family's tree say to you? What are you noticing in this family's tree? Afia says scores are increasing. Passed down through slavery. No, Jim did a conversation or one of our presentations where he had a couple of slides where it talked about this, and even in events like war and Holocaust, if the study of epigenetics is telling us that trauma is being passed down, my second, to go along with the second takeaway that I hope becomes a part of your repertoire, is making sure that whoever gets to hear and learn about ACEs for the first time, that to Melinda's point, trauma is generational. And yes, the scores starting from the 8, the 7, they started going up. And I like to tell, at least when I look at my family tree, is that many of us are dying at the hands of other people's ACEs. So as clinicians and practitioners, one of the things that I've had people come and ask me a lot as somebody without a degree in this field is, how do you start the conversation with people? How do you get people interested in this information? So I pose to you all is, how could you use somebody else's information, somebody's OPP, other people's property, or other people's story to get the conversation started in your communities or your practice? So I do want to offer this tree as a resource with some guiding questions that could be used, especially if you're a trainer or if you do group work or peer type of groups, but I wanted to offer this up as a resource for those of y'all who are interested in signing up for it. But right now, this is a part of the presentation where I ask you all to think of some ways you could use this and bringing the conversation up with people who are learning about ACEs for the first time or getting ready to go down the rabbit hole learning about ACEs. And thank you, Cindy Williams. Let this get on the recording, but I do want to drop a couple of nuggets for those that are interested in getting a digital copy of this family's tree. First and foremost, if what we know to be true about ACEs and the cellular environment, the key point here is that if we do open up the conversation with ACEs, we have to include the science of it. That way we remove the personal ownership of what might have happened to people in their childhood. And here, what you see is my grandparents in the 1920s, before each of them turned 18 years old, they had experienced at least an ACE score of 8. And this is my guesstimate. Both of my grandparents have passed away, but just based on the stories that have been passed down, each of my grandparents born during the Great Depression, which is another adverse experience, trauma bonded, and those two aids came together. And by the time they started producing children, each of their children left the house with a minimum of an ACE score of 7. My family was generous enough to take the ACE quiz when I started doing this work, and it was like this aha moment for me of just seeing how at a cellular level trauma is being passed down, many times unintentionally. And I agree with what Colleen is saying, is that you can heal generations as well known about ACEs on a genetic perspective by addressing the issues. It removed a lot of guilt from me, both as a person with adverse childhood experiences and as a parent who, unfortunately, my child ended up leaving home with quite a few ACEs. So this is available if anybody's interested. I'm gonna actually drop the link in the chat if you want to sign up for it, if you want to get a copy of it and some guiding questions that you could possibly use for it. So I'm going to drop that in the chat, and then I'm going to be quiet in like 6 minutes and we can do some like Q&A if there's any, but that's available. So this is the A of the PAIR score. And I would encourage that if there's an opportunity to get people familiar with it for the first time, obviously you can hire somebody to come in and start the conversation with you. That's what we're using our platform at ACEs Matter to do. But then if you want to DIY, using this as a resource and then pulling blank copies of the Adverse Childhood Experience score and doing something similar to what the Compassion Prison Project does, which is they do a step inside the circle to introduce people to the ACE score. So if you're not familiar with Compassion Prison Project and their step inside the circle activity, I would put that down as a resource if you're going to open up like what I like to call a can of worms. Okay, almost done. The last letter in the PAIR survey that I've used to help people, including myself along this journey, is the resilience score. So I mentioned earlier that there was a lady in training who she not only had a high ACE score, she also had a low PCE score. And we introduced the resilience survey, right? Because just showing up to a professional development is a characteristic of being resilient and wanting to come out. So really, again, trying to use our time with people who are going through this conversation to help them understand how to move through ACEs, not necessarily get over them. I emphasize moving through their ACEs and not getting over them, because I think telling people they can get over their ACEs, at least for me, set up unrealistic expectations.
And Cindy, we did have, just quick, we had a
Ready?
no, we had a request. So when you sent the link, you sent it to the host and panelists. So if you could just send it to everyone. Thank you, Karen, for that heads up.
Thank you. I see that now. I see that. Got it. Thank you, Karen. My last nugget, if I can leave with y'all, is because of the work that I am doing with adverse childhood experiences, both from a professional and professional level, personal and professional level. I honestly had to go on no contact with a few family members who, for lack of a better word, just weren't good for my energy. It comes up a lot in the work that I do, where people want to know how to fix their mom or how to get their dad or whoever to come to this conversation. And early in my journey, because I don't have the background of psychotherapists and, you know, all the great education that I know will come, I just had to go on no contact with a few family members who I realized had a lot more cellular trauma that even my presence would cause people to react. But I bring that up and I'm gonna close out with this quick little clip from Oprah. Let me try one more time because I think that my sound is not gonna be there, but watch what Oprah says about, you know, what happens when, you know, you're working with people who are learning about ACEs for the first time. Well, she doesn't go into the detail about ACEs, but let me not spoil it. I'm gonna just play it just a second.
You can love someone and still choose to say goodbye to them. You can miss a person every day and still be glad that they're no longer in your life. I think that for a lot of people, that's a contradiction, that if you love, then you're supposed to put up with it no matter what. You can't also be glad that they're gone. But, I mean, I think there's such power and wisdom in that.
With all the with the few technical difficulties, I want to leave you with that if we are going to, again, for lack of a better word, open up a can of worms, I'm going to say that we do it with care. And whether you use ACEs Matters, pair ideas, or you find some creative ways to integrate it into the conversations, I'm going to highly encourage that we meet people where they are. By helping them be able to visualize. And that's the whole idea of the graphics, the dendrite tree, and even the ACEs tree. That's the whole idea, is to like let people see the possibilities through visuals. And then if the conversation seems to be tough or the wounds too deep, starting the conversation with somebody else's story, like using the dendrite tree as a resource to get people introduced to the concept. And again, the intended target when you use somebody else's work is to help people see the possibilities and that it didn't start with you. So that is the who kicked the can one. Last thoughts, a highlight for me, and you all could probably share this sentiment, especially if you are a scholar and a well-read person and you just like to learn. There are other people that we will work with that don't necessarily grasp learning as much as others do, and that's okay too. I share that to say is I did this work because I realized that the information that was out there on ACEs, it was above some people's comprehension level. The abbreviated ACE study in itself was 14 pages, and it was full of medical terminology that the layperson just can't understand. So meet people where they are and facilitate conversations that match the vibrational level of the people who were there to get help. And that may mean doing programs like what James didn't have put in place, where they are going on the inside of the communities, pulling people out that are right there straddling existence, and then training them to be the voices in the community. So that's what I mean when I say meet people at the level where they're vibrating, because nobody wants to plant a seed and wait for it to grow and just watch it. It'd be like watching paint dry, but you cannot underestimate the power of planting a seed. And if we want to do it fast, we have to meet participants where they are, which sounds like a very old cliche, but imagine trying to ask this radio to do what we can get Alexa to do today. That's almost the equivalent, right? We wouldn't dare ask that radio to tell us, we can't speak to that radio. We can turn the dials, but we can't speak to it. And then throw some parties. My last piece of advice, and I'm going to stop here, I promise. Throw some parties. Many people who are stuck in this cycle of adverse childhood experiences, at least from my limited bandwidth, have been traumatized even by the school system. So setting up environments where people want to learn, where it doesn't necessarily feel like a webinar or presentation or something like what we might be used to. I've created spaces where now I do home parties for people. And I'll go to your home, and this one lady cooked dinner, and we showed the movie and we started a conversation. So finding out ways people will be comfortable starting the conversation. And that's it. That is all, folks. That is all. How did I do on time, Jim? I did not meet my goal.
It's okay. And I think we do have a couple of minutes for questions. So for folks out there, please feel free to chat in any questions you might have. And actually, I'm gonna take the privilege of being the facilitator for this and maybe ask one while we wait for others to come in. And that is, for you, and I think you touched on this, and I think it might be in the resource that you shared with folks. So if you can give folks a little bit of an idea of what are some of those questions, because I think you said in the resource, and I know, of course, folk can access the resource. How do you start the conversation? Because you've been talking about how do you start the conversation just about ACEs? And then the other part that I think you've been bringing up, how do you start the conversation about intergenerational ACEs in your family? And so your thoughts about that.
Okay, if I'm following along with that, a couple of things that I have written down to support that particular integration of that graphic is to, let's say if you were to use that graphic, ask participants to tell the story from the tree's perspective. The idea is to get the conversation started. Once you get the conversation started, if I'm going in the right direction, giving a people to tell their story without telling their story, if that kind of makes sense. And in terms of the intergenerational part, I can only give you a real life example. I had a lady who hired me to come in and start the conversation for her nonprofit. And she wanted to do it before she actually got the nonprofit off the ground, because she wanted all the people on her board and the staff that she had already identified. She wanted them to know about ACEs before they even opened up their home to women from shelters. And she brought her mom to the party. Her mom was just a single mom growing up, and her mom was probably in her 70s. So I say with the intergenerational one, I've had so many parties where people are bringing their parents to the parties. And that right there is allowing somebody else to gently open the can of worms without it being like a judging moment where you could have been a better mom. So that's one thing that I know has worked since I've been doing the whole parties, is inviting families to the party and letting the science do the talking.
Great.
Did I answer your question? Is that kind of where
No, absolutely. And just to be clear, I think the power of your work, Cendie, is in bringing this to the community. And you, of course, as a trusted messenger, as someone who can bring their own stories to this. And I think as we think about, ACEs awareness and understanding the impact, I think programs like yours and approaches like yours in terms of bringing it out to the community so that people can get the help that they need is so critical. I did want to mention too, and I mentioned this on the webinar we did yesterday, going back to the point about positive childhood experiences. And I just wanted to reiterate a piece of research that came out in the journal Pediatrics that showed first that something that we all know, which is, parents with ACEs and mental health challenges have children who have behavioral problems. We've known that for many. What was interesting though is what attenuated that relationship was the existence of positive childhood experiences. And what's really wonderful about this place that we're in right now is that we're looking at ACEs, but we're also beginning to look at the importance of resilience and positive childhood experiences. And what that tells me is that in our work, and I say this for the audience, in our work, we have to be, and we talk about this a lot in our work, is yes, conversations about ACEs and trauma have to be paired with conversations about strengths, resilience, and positive childhood experiences. But in this particular case, because for two reasons, it seems to me, it gives you two things. One is it helps you to understand why some folks might struggle more than others and why some children might be more at risk than others and families, but also where those families and where those parents need greater support, right? It was just a thought and a comment, but I wanted to get your thoughts about that as well. There are a lot of parents out there who are struggling, who don't have those positive childhood experiences, who may need more support than others.
Yeah, and that happened like in real life. A couple weeks ago, I did a training for a child care center where these parents were getting free child care in exchange for professional development. Look at the creativity. Think of this. Some philanthropist wrote a check and said, you can have up to 15 women drop their children off at this safe date child care center. We will give them free child care. The caveat is they have to agree to attend personal and professional development sessions once a week. These are people whose incomes are less than $30,000 a year. So some nice person just was like, I want to be able to do this. And again, I think somebody put education as one of the things that they wanted. We have to create spaces that make sense for people with ACEs. So I didn't mean to do that on purpose, but we have to like intentionally create these spaces. And so at the same time, multiple problems to solve. Like daycare is expensive. I need a job. Now she's got, not only these ladies have a job, but they have a daycare that's covering the expense, and they're also getting professional learning one time a week. And the daycare is covering all of those expenses. So just being creative once we learn this information.
Yeah, and that reminds me of some of the comments that came in earlier about the importance of systems and creating systems that help folks overcome ACEs. We're going to have to stop here because we're almost out of time, but I did want to give the audience a little bit of a heads up. And Cendie, I don't know if you can bring up the slides because we do have a couple of upcoming events and a thank you, but as you do that, I just want to mention again on this topic of intergenerational trauma. So we've been doing a series. Yesterday, as Cendie mentioned, we did a panel discussion with parents around ACEs awareness, and Cendie was a part of that group. And thank you again, Cendie, for joining us today for this conversation. Next week, we're going to have a conversation about intergenerational trauma with Dr. Galit Atlas. She's written a book called Emotional Intelligence, a book I recommend for folks to read. And she shares her experiences as a therapist, as a psychoanalyst, doing work with folks on intergenerational trauma. You don't want to miss that if you're interested in this topic. In addition to that, next week, we have Understanding ACEs on the Journey to Adulthood, a panel discussion with youth peer advocates to give you their perspective on what, and in many ways, as Cendie has done, and as we did yesterday with parents, to give you their perspective on what their needs are and how we can make systems more ACEs aware and responsive to young people who've been and experienced ACEs as well. So those two events are coming up. You can go to the CTAC website. If you can go to the next slide, Cendie, thank you all. Go to the CTAC website. Please sign up for those upcoming events. And I want to just thank you all for participating in this webinar. And I want to thank again our partner, our collaborator, our friend, Cendie Stanford, for a wonderful presentation. And we look forward to seeing you and others in the future. Cendie, I see you put in the chat. Calendar. Thank you for the calendar. Thank you for the calendar. And again, thank you all. Thank you, Cendie, for a wonderful presentation, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you so much.